Hello everyone, and welcome back to Aliens After Dark. Every night on this channel I share alien and UFO encounter stories, told softly to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. Now, get comfortable, let your eyes close if they want to, and let's begin. 3 inches of snow fell on that shelf overnight, and in the morning there was nothing in it. No boot print, no drag mark, and 4 boulders and 4 wooden stakes were gone off the ground. My name's Bo Trammell. In October of 2009, I was 20 years old, a lance corporal, a combat engineer, and I was living at the highest landing zone on the mountain warfare course up in the High Sierra. There were about 140 of us up there that month, and most of us had never seen real snow. I'm from East Tennessee. We get snow. We do not get the kind of snow that arrives sideways at 9,000 feet and then decides to stay. They give you a brief before you go up. Everybody gets it. It's a slide deck in a cold classroom at the bottom of the hill, and a staff sergeant reads it to you in the voice people use for slide decks. Altitude sickness, pulmonary edema, which is your lungs filling up, cerebral edema, which is worse, and then a bullet point near the bottom that says hypoxia can cause confusion, poor judgment, and hallucinations. I want to be honest about that up front because I know what it sounds like. I sat through that brief. I could probably still recite it. And I've thought about it maybe 500 times in the years since, because it would be a tidy answer. It's just that 4 of us were in it, and the rocks were gone. LZ is a generous word for what that place was. It's a bare shelf of granite with enough flat on it to put a helicopter down if the pilot is having a good day, and 1 big white bark pine growing up hard against a rock face at the back of it. That tree and that rock face were the only 2 things up there that had any personality. There were 3 of us under the tarps. Me, another engineer named Ivy, and a water dog, a water purification specialist, attached to us for the exercise, whose actual name I have honestly lost and who I only ever called Water Dog, which he seemed fine with. The way you build a shelter up there is you take 2 tarps and you tie one end of them to the tree, high, and then you run the other ends out and down and you anchor them, so the whole thing makes a kind of lean-to that wraps around the trunk. Water rolls off. Your gear stays dry, you stay mostly dry, which up there is the whole game, because wet is how people get hurt, and you anchor it with rocks and stakes. 4 rocks, 4 stakes. That was our number. The rocks were small boulders, the kind you carry with both arms, and set down harder than you meant to. The stakes were wooden, about 18 inches, driven in at an angle. I counted them, every night. Out loud, because Ivy thought it was funny, and after a while it was a thing we did. 4 rocks, 4 stakes. It sounds like nothing. It isn't nothing. The wind on that shelf will take a poncho liner into the next county if you let it. And if you lose your shelter at 2 in the morning at 9,000 feet in October, you're not sleeping again. And if you're not sleeping, you're not worth anything the next day. And the next day is a patrol. Everything up there was a small procedure like that. You slept with your entree inside your sleeping bag or you didn't eat it, because an MRE freezes solid at that altitude and a frozen one takes about 40 minutes of body heat to become food again. You kept your batteries in your armpit. You put your boots inside the bag with you, upside down, which is miserable and which everybody does. There's a whole list. Most of it is about keeping things where you can find them, which I have thought about a fair amount since. Ivy had a bayonet. He'd bought it himself, which you're not really supposed to do, and he'd paid $250 for it, which he told everybody. He would fix it on his rifle and take it off and fix it on again all day, the way some people click a pen. We gave him hell about it constantly. I remember asking him if it came with a Camaro and 29% financing. He said it was a classic. Everything he owned was a classic. Below us, maybe 40 minutes down a switchback if you were moving carefully in the dark, there was a company patrol base with the infantry in it. And below that, on a flat, the animal packers had a string of mules and donkeys staked out. That's a real course. They teach Marines to move gear with pack animals in country where a vehicle can't go, and the packers use the same training area, and they walk those animals through at all hours. Your first week up there, a string of mules comes through the middle of your patrol base at 2 a.m, and you nearly come out of your skin, and then somebody tells you that's normal, and then it's normal. That's the shape of the place. I'm telling you all of it because I want you to understand there were reasons for every sound up there. Mules, Marines, wind, ice coming off a branch. It was a noisy mountain, is what I'm saying, and none of us were jumpy. We'd been making skinwalker jokes for 2 weeks. Everybody did. Somebody would be walking back from filling canteens, and somebody else would say, "Something's going to grab you." And that was the whole joke. And it worked every time because we were tired and 20 years old. Nobody made that joke after that week. I noticed that later, not right away. Later, at the bottom of the hill, I realized I hadn't heard it in days. The snow started around dusk. Wet, heavy stuff. The kind that sticks to everything and bows the branches down. We got under the tarps around 9. I did the count, 4 rocks, 4 stakes. I remember doing it because my hands were bad by then, and I remember being annoyed about the last stake. I woke up at 10 to the sound of a charging handle. If you've never handled an M4, that's the piece you pull back to load it. It makes a sound you cannot mistake for anything else once you've heard it about 1,000 times. A metal draw and a snap. In a dead, quiet tactical environment, on a mountain where you are supposed to be making no noise at all, that sound is somebody being an idiot, and somebody being an idiot at 10 at night is going to get talked to. So I sat up. My rifle was on the ground next to me. Ivy's was on the ground next to him, and Ivy was in his bag with his eyes shut. The only weapon I couldn't see was the water dog's because he slept on the far side of the trunk, and he had that bayonet business going with his own rifle half the time. I said something like, "Hey, is that you?" He got up out of his bag. He was awake, and he was annoyed at being awake, and he said it wasn't him. He was very clear about it. He hadn't touched his weapon. So now I've got a different idea. Now I think one of the infantry guys has climbed 40 minutes up a switchback in the snow to sneak up on the engineers and rack his charging handle at us, which is exactly the kind of thing a 20-year-old will do, and I am delighted about it, honestly. I pulled out my bar, not to use it, just to have it, because I was going to go be very intimidating at somebody, and I crawled out from under the tarps. There was nobody there. I stood out on the shelf in the snow in my socks and my long johns holding a knife like an idiot, and there was nobody there. No tracks. It had been coming down heavy for an hour, and there was nothing on that snow but me. I had my headlamp on, and it wasn't doing much. At that temperature, the lens fogs almost as soon as you switch it on, and what you get is a white wall about a foot in front of your face, so you end up turning it off and using your eyes, which work better than people think once you give them a minute. What I remember most is the smell. Wet granite has a smell. It's cold and mineral and a little sour, close to a basement, and with the snow coming down, it was the only thing my nose had to work with. And then I heard boots on the switchback, and it was my sergeant coming up. He'd heard it too. From 40 minutes below, in his own bag, he'd heard a charging handle, and he'd come up the hill to find out which one of his engineers was going to have a bad month. He got up on the shelf and he saw me standing there with the knife, and he asked me what in God's name I was doing. I told him. He listened. Then he went quiet in a way that I didn't think about at the time. We stood under that rock face and talked for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Him and me, out in the open, looking around at a shelf with nothing on it. He said he'd go ask the fire watch. I said I'd go back to bed. While we were standing there, something landed on the tarp behind us. One little tick, like a piece of grit dropping. I turned my head and I didn't see anything, and I didn't think about it. Grit falls off a rock face. That's what rock faces do. He came back about 10 minutes later. Fire watch hadn't moved. Nobody'd left the patrol base. Everybody was accounted for all night, and the infantry had been asleep except the 2 on watch, and the 2 on watch had seen nothing and heard the same noise we did and assumed it was us. He told us to go back to sleep. And here's the part I want to be fair about. I did. I went back in my bag, and I was out in about 90 seconds, and I slept hard. It didn't scare me. It was a mystery, and mysteries are fine when you're that tired. Somebody had messed with us. Somehow. Fine. I woke up at 6 because it was light, and because my face was cold in a way it shouldn't have been. The tarps were on the ground, not blown off. Blown off looks like something. Blown off means a corner is loose and the rest is whipping and there's a mess. These were down flat, both of them, laid out on the snow like somebody had unhooked them from the tree and set them down, and the rocks were gone. All 4, and the stakes. All 4. Out of 3 inches of snow, off a shelf with about 40 feet of open ground on it in every direction, and there was not a single mark on that snow. No boot print, no drag mark, not a scuff. Our own tracks from the night before were still there, filled in and soft, but still there, which tells you the snow held a mark just fine. I want to be clear that I looked. All 3 of us looked. We were on our hands and knees looking. Because at 20 years old, your first thought is not that something impossible happened. Your first thought is that you're going to have to explain a missing shelter to your platoon sergeant. The other thing I saw, and I only saw it because I was looking up trying to figure out how you'd get a rope on the tarps, the white bark's lowest branch was bare. The whole tree was loaded. Every branch on it had 3 inches of snow sitting on it. That one branch, the low one, the one right over where we slept, was clean and dry underneath, like something had been holding onto it all night and the snow had come off in one piece. My sergeant came up around then with coffee. He looked at the tarps and he looked at the snow and he didn't say anything for a while. Then he told us what he saw. He said that at 10 o'clock, after he told me to go back to bed, he was standing right about where we'd been talking, and something caught his eye up at the top of the rock face. So he looked up. And there was a person up there, except he said person, and then he corrected himself, because it was bald, and it was pale, and it didn't have anything on. Just the head and the shoulders and part of one arm, leaning out over the edge, looking down. He said it had eyes that caught his light. And he said that when it saw that he'd seen it, it drew back. Not fast. Not the way a person snaps out of sight when they're caught. It just went back, unhurried, the way you'd lean back from a window. He said he stood there for a minute waiting for it to be a Marine in a poncho, and it wasn't, and then he decided it was the altitude. He'd been up there a week. He'd had the brief, same as us. So he went to bed and didn't say anything, and he wasn't going to say anything ever. And then he came up in the morning and saw our tarps flat on the ground and the snow with nothing in it. Here's the arithmetic that I have never once been able to get around, and I've had 16 years. When he looked up and saw it, that was after he came up the hill. That was after he and I stood under that rock face for 3 or 4 minutes talking about who was making noise. Which means the entire time the 2 of us were standing out there in the open at 10 o'clock at night in a snowstorm, having a conversation about a sound. It was already up there, above us, looking at the tops of our heads, and I heard the grit hit the tarp. There was one more thing, and then I'll stop. When it got full light, I climbed up the backside of the rock face, which took about 15 minutes and which I should not have done in those conditions. On top, there was a lot of snow and no tracks in it. But right at the lip, right about where he said the head and shoulders had been, there was a ring melted down to bare stone. Round, maybe the size of my palm laid flat. It was 26 degrees. It was 7 in the morning. The sun was not on that face, and wouldn't be for 2 more hours. I put my hand on the rock inside the ring, and it was warm. Not hot. Warm, the way a mug is warm 20 minutes after you finish it. At breakfast that morning, down at the flat, one of the packers said something to nobody in particular about how quiet his animals had been. Mules are not quiet. A mule on a picket line will carry on for 20 minutes about a coyote a mile off, and there is no arguing with it, and everybody who has ever slept near one knows this. He said they hadn't made a sound all night. Not one of them. He said it like a man complaining about a good thing he doesn't trust. I didn't say anything to him. I was 19 days from going home, and I wanted to go home. 11 days later, at the far end of the shelf, somebody found the stakes. All 4 of them, driven into frozen ground, points down, standing in a line, evenly spaced, about a hand's width apart. Nobody could get them out. We tried, because we thought that was funny. The rocks never turned up. I got out in 2014. I've got 2 kids now and a wife who has stopped asking. Every campsite, every hunting trip, every beach umbrella at Gulf Shores in July, I anchor everything, and I count it out loud. 4 rocks, 4 stakes. My daughter counts along with me now, which she thinks is a game. Maybe it was the altitude and 4 separate people had 4 separate versions of the same bad night. That's possible. I've read that it's possible, but the snow didn't have anything in it, and the stone was warm, and I still count. There were 8, there are always 8. I want to start there, because everything else I'm going to tell you rests on that. Nadine Okafor. I'm a hospital corpsman, and in June of 2016, I was 26 and attached to an infantry battalion, and we were up in the hills above the lake at Camp Pendleton, running a field exercise that involved, among other things, moving pretend casualties around in the dark. I grew up in Houston. Before I enlisted, I worked 2 years as a tech in a county emergency room on nights, which is where I learned the only useful thing I know about myself, which is what my brain does at 4 in the morning when it's been awake too long. It makes faces, in curtains, in equipment, in the dark part of a hallway. Everyone's does. You learn to let it happen and keep working. So, I'll say this once and then I'll get on with it. A tired brain invents faces. It does not invent inventory. Our casualty collection point was a kilometer off the trail. That's on purpose. If you put the aid station next to the company, nobody has to actually carry anybody anywhere, and then the exercise teaches nothing. So they put us out in a little clearing in the chaparral with 1 tent, a generator, a string of green lights, and a row of litters, and the company slept in a draw about 400 meters below us with orders not to come up unless somebody sent them. It was me and one other corpsman, a kid named Prentice who was 19 and good and asked a lot of questions. The country up there is oak and chaparral and dust that smells like black pepper when you kick it. In June, you get the marine layer. It comes over the ridge sometime around 2 in the morning, most nights, and it settles down over everything like a lid on a pot, and the temperature drops 8 or 9 degrees in about a minute and a half. You can hear it coming, sort of. Things get muffled ahead of it. The litters were the thing I owned. 8 of them, folded, stacked at the head of the clearing in a row. A litter is a stretcher, 2 poles and canvas, and it folds down the middle. 8 is what we drew, and 8 is what we signed for, and at every shift change I counted them by hand, and initialed a green card in my cargo pocket. Not because anyone made me, because losing one is a report, and I would rather count to 8 40 times than write one report. Prentice thought this was hilarious. He would count them behind me, loudly, whenever I did it. There's a lot of that in the job. Everything I own gets laid out left to right in the same order every single time, so that in the dark, my hand goes where my hand goes and I don't have to think. Shears, tape, tourniquet, needle, seal, left to right. I could do it now, in this chair, with my eyes closed, and I haven't touched a field kit in 6 years. That first part of the night was pleasant, and I don't want to lose that. It's easy to tell one of these and make the whole evening sound like a held breath, and it wasn't. There were eucalyptus windbreaks up on the ridge that push their smell downhill after dark, and it's a good smell, medicinal and clean. The lake fog sat below us like a white floor with the hilltops coming up out of it. The generator ran its one note, which you stop hearing after about 10 minutes and then never hear again until something changes. Prentice had a casualty card he thought was the funniest object ever printed. They're little tags with injuries on them that you pin to a Marine, so the corpsman has something to treat. And his said, in official type, traumatic amputation, both feet, patient ambulatory. He carried it in his helmet band the whole exercise. He made me read it out loud twice. We ran 9 lines at each other to pass the time. That's the medevac request format. 9 pieces of information in a fixed order, and you learn it the way you learn a prayer, and reciting it at someone is somewhere between a drill and a joke. Location, call sign and frequency, number of patients by precedence, and so on. It's a comfort object, that list. It has never once occurred to me, until just now, that everything I do to feel steady is a thing with a fixed number of parts. The layer came over a little after 2, and every insect in that draw stopped at the same time. I don't mean they faded. I've been outside enough nights to know how sound fades. This was one note and then nothing, the way a radio quits when you pull the cord. Crickets, that whirring thing the chaparral does, all of it. Gone between 1 second and the next. Prentice said, "Quiet, that's weird." Then he asked me who else was out there. I said nobody. He said, "Then who's breathing?" And once he said it, I could hear it too. Slow. Regular. Coming from outside the tent somewhere on the north side, and it was the interval that got me, because it was wrong. A person at rest breathes maybe 12 to 16 times a minute. This was slower than that. Not a lot. Enough that I found myself counting it against my own watch and getting numbers I didn't like. Then it started walking around the tent. I never saw it. I need to be clear about that because I know how this works and I know what people want. I did not see it. I tracked it 2 ways. The first was the dew. There was condensation on the canvas by then, and as it went past a panel, the dew came off that panel in a shiver, and then the next panel, and then the next, all the way around. Slow. Like somebody with a hand out, brushing along the side of a car in a parking garage. The second was the shadow on the wall. Our green lights were low, on the deck, so anything outside threw up onto the canvas big and distorted, and I know that, and I made every allowance for that. It was still too high. The angle would have needed a man on stilts, and it didn't move like a man on stilts. Stilts have a rhythm to them. This had a kind of gather and go, and the shadow got thinner and taller when it gathered. It went around the tent by my count 4 full times, and it never crossed the door. That's the piece I chew on. The tent door was open, and there was a wedge of green light lying out on the dirt. Maybe 8 feet of it. To circle that tent 4 times, it had to cross that light 4 times. It didn't. Not once. It went around it, which means it knew the light was there, and it decided. 9 minutes, more or less. I timed the end of it against the generator hour meter, so 9 is close. 400 meters down the draw, there was a rifle company. 100 and some men, and 2 of them awake on watch. Nobody woke up. Nobody came up. And 2 days later, without me bringing it up, one of the guys who'd had watch that night said it was the quietest night he ever pulled at Pendleton, and the other one agreed with him, and neither of them was making a point. They were just talking. Then the layer lifted, and the crickets came back all at once, which was somehow worse than them stopping. Prentice laughed. I laughed. We said coyote because you say coyote. I took a light with a red lens and walked the perimeter and found dust. My own boot prints, 1 beer can from probably the 1980s, and nothing else. Nothing pulled at, nothing chewed, nothing taken. No scat. Coyotes leave scat and they leave tracks and they knock things over, because a coyote wants your trash. The red lens is standard, and it does one thing to you that nobody warns you about the first time, which is that under red light blood is black. It's the first thing anybody tells you in training, and you still aren't ready for it. Out there, it just made the dust look like the surface of something. I walked the whole perimeter twice at about a pace a minute, and I was calm the entire time, which I offer as evidence of nothing except that I was calm. I went back in and warmed a bag of saline under my arm, which is a thing corpsmen do so you're not putting cold fluid into somebody, and I sat there with it and told myself a story about mountain lions that I no longer remember, but that worked fine at the time. At first light, I went out to count litters, because it was shift change, and that is what I do. There were 9. 8 folded in the row where they belonged, and a 9th one standing on its legs, unfolded, at the head of the row, squared up and facing the tent door. I stood there for a while. I want to say I did something smart. I stood there. Then I did the thing you'd do. I put my hand flat on the canvas of it. It was warm. Not sun warm. The sun wasn't up and it was facing west anyway. Warm the length of it evenly, the way a bed is warm after somebody gets out of it. I moved my hand 3 times to check and it was warm everywhere I put my hand and cool at the very edges of the canvas where the frame was. There was dew on all 8 of the folded ones. Beads of it, enough to wet your palm. There was none on the 9th. The other thing about it, which I noticed later and which took me a while to put words to, it was squared. Not set down at an angle the way you'd drop a thing. Its feet were parallel to the row, and its head end was pointed at our door, dead on, the way a chair gets placed by somebody who cares about how a room looks. Somebody had set it up. Slowly. 10 feet from where the 2 of us were sitting. Prentice came out and I made him count. He counted 9. He counted again and got 9 and stopped laughing. Then I took the green card out of my cargo pocket, the one I initialed at midnight in my handwriting with my pen. It said 9. I have thought about that card more than I have thought about the shadow. A shadow is a shadow. I'm not going to win an argument about a shadow with anybody, including myself. But I wrote a number down 6 hours earlier, at a time when there were 8 litters in that row, because I had counted them, because I always count them, and the number I wrote is 9. I did not report it. There was nothing to report. Nothing was missing. If anything, I was up 1, and there is no form for that. We turned in 9 litters at the end of the exercise, and Supply took 9 without a word, which I think about too. I kept the card. It's in a shoebox in my mother's house with my dive pin and some photographs. My husband has seen it. He's the only one. I'm out now. I work in a hospital in Katy and I'm good at it and nothing has ever happened to me again. I count things twice. I count linens. I count instruments. I count the beds on my hall on a night when I have no reason to. And I read anything before I initial it. Twice. All the way through. Every time. I have been made fun of for that in 3 different jobs. I don't mind. Somebody wrote a 9 on my card. Maybe it was me. Maybe I was tired, and my hand made a 9 because my brain was already somewhere else, and I have been careful ever since about a thing that never actually happened. That's the version I'd like, Some nights, it's even the version I've got. 120 pounds of air went to nothing in about 4 seconds, and there is no way for that to happen. That's not a feeling, that's a gauge. I'm Delia Whitcomb. I drove 7 tons for the Marine Corps motor transport, and in February of 2018 I was 22 years old and about 11 months into being genuinely good at it, which is the best I ever felt about anything. We were out at 29 Palms doing a night convoy, out past the lava beds, and I was the truck that broke down. I'm from Klamath Falls, Oregon. My dad had a shop. I can tell you the sound a bad wheel bearing makes over the phone. That's the whole of my personality, and I'm at peace with it. Here's what you need to know about air. A 7-ton run's air brakes. There's a compressor that builds pressure into 2 tanks, and everything about stopping that truck depends on that pressure, and every morning before you take it anywhere, you do a pump-down check. You build to 120 pounds, you shut the engine off, and you sit there and watch the needle. It'll bleed a little. Everything bleeds a little. More than a couple pounds a minute, and the truck is deadlined and doesn't go anywhere, and you fill out paperwork you hate. I did that check every morning for 11 months. I know that gauge the way I know my own pulse. I could tell you where the needle would settle on a cold morning versus a warm one. That night, we were running blacked out, which means blackout drive lights, which means you get about a truck length of gravel in front of you and a dim little marker on the truck ahead and nothing else in the world. People argue about whether they help. They don't help. They exist so you can see the guy in front of you and he can see you, and that is the entire benefit. It was cold. Desert cold gets into the steel of the cab and then into you through the seat. 29 degrees. And the wind out there had been combing the creosote flat all evening, steady from the west. My A driver, the second driver, the one who sleeps so you can swap, was a kid named Skaggs who slept anywhere, anytime, with one earbud and playing a country station out of Yucca Valley loud enough that I could identify the song from the driver's seat. 2 things about that stretch of ground because they matter later. The first is the lava. There are old flows out that way, black and broken, and they do something to sound. A truck going by a lava field sounds like a truck going by a wall. You get your own engine back at you, a beat late, and then when you clear the flow, the sound just leaves. The first time it happens, you think you've lost a cylinder. The second is the town. There's a training town out there, a whole built-up place with streets and 2-story buildings, and at night, with no lights in it, the windows look like real windows. Not plywood, real ones, black, arranged the way a person would arrange them. We drove past it about 20 minutes before all of this, and I looked at it the way you always look at it, which is a second too long. I had a couple of MRE heaters in my cargo pocket. You're not supposed to use them for that. You're supposed to use them to heat food. But you crack one, add a splash from your canteen, wrap it in a sock and put it in your glove, and you get about 40 minutes of warm hand out of it. Every driver in that company did it. That night, I had one going in my left glove, and I remember the diesel smell coming off my sleeve, and diesel smells different in the cold. Sweeter. Almost like something you'd want to eat, which sounds ridiculous and is true. About an hour in, my air warning light came on. Low pressure, which is annoying and normal, and means you pull out of the line and let everybody go by, and then you sort it out. So I pulled out. I let the column pass. I gave the hand signal, which nobody saw, because it was dark and blacked out, and hand signals are mostly a formality at that point. And then the last truck went over a rise and its little marker light went with it, and I was alone. Then the needle went to 0. Not down, to 0. 120 to nothing in about the time it takes to say the word. I sat there with my hand still on the shifter and watched it happen. You need to understand that for the tanks to dump that fast, you need a line severed. Physically cut. And if a line goes on those trucks, you hear it, because it's 120 pounds of air leaving through a half-inch hole, and it screams. I didn't hear anything. I got out with a light. That's the job. You get out, you go under, you look for the leak, because there's always a leak. And I'd have been happy to find a leak. And there was no sound out there. I want to be careful with that. Deserts are quiet, sure, but that's not the same as no sound. That night I could feel the wind on my face, on my cheek, cold, coming steady from the same direction it had been all evening. The creosote wasn't moving. I stood there for a while, looking at a bush I could feel wind on, and that was holding perfectly still, and my brain did the thing where it just declines the problem and hands you back something easier. So I went and looked at my truck instead. I went down the driver's side with the light and found nothing. Came back up, started down the trailer, and that's when the frost started going flat. There was frost on the deck plate along the top of the trailer, a thin white skin of it, and it went flat, panel by panel, in a line, moving up toward the cab. Something was going along the length of that trailer at about head height on the far side from me, and I never saw one piece of it. I just watched the frost crush down, and then the next, and then the next. I'll tell you exactly what I did. I got in the cab and I locked it, which is stupid, because a 7-ton cab lock is a joke, and I sat there. I didn't wake Skaggs. I've been asked why about 100 times, mostly by myself. The answer is that if I woke him, I'd have to say a sentence out loud, and I didn't have one. Every sentence I had was a sentence that made me the person who says it, so I sat with both hands on the wheel like I was driving, which I wasn't, and I looked at the mirror, which is where you look. My truck was still idling, 29 degrees and a diesel at idle, and I was looking straight at my own stack out the mirror. There was no exhaust, none. Not thin, not blowing sideways. The air above that stack was empty, and I could hear the engine turning over under my feet. Skaggs slept through the entire thing. All of it. I'm not exaggerating. He did not stir. 4 days later, at chow, he said, out of nowhere, that he'd had a dream that week about being looked at, and he laughed about it. And I did not tell him one word about that night for another 2 years. Then the trail vehicle came back for me. Headlights. Real ones. They'd gone white for the recovery. And a mechanic named Fontaine hanging out the window cussing me for being the reason he was awake. And I have never been so glad to be called what he called me. The gauge built normally. He watched it. 120, holding, bleeding 2 pounds a minute like a good girl. He went underneath with a real light and came back out and told me there was nothing wrong with my truck and asked me if I'd bumped the parking brake, which is the mechanic's version of asking if you tried turning it off and on. It was over. That's the honest sequence. It was over, and it had been 15 minutes of my life, and I was already deciding it was a fault that didn't repeat. Then Fontaine swung his truck around to lead me back in, and his headlights came across my mirror. A quarter of a second, maybe less. There was something on top of my trailer. Folded down small, that's the only way I can say it. Crouched with its knees up, somewhere near its head, pale, the color of the inside of a shell. Not looking at me. Looking off the back of the trailer, out at the dark, in the direction the convoy had gone. It had one hand around the tie-down rail. The rail runs the width of the trailer roof and it's welded to brackets. I know what the spacing on those brackets is because I've run straps on that rail 100 times. 30 inches. The hand spanned 2 brackets. And then the light swung past and the mirror had a trailer roof in it and nothing else, and I drove back to the motor pool at 40 miles an hour, behind a man who thought I was upset about paperwork. In the daylight, the rail was bowed, not dented. There's a difference, and any welder will tell you. Dented is impact. This was bowed, The whole rail deflected down maybe an inch and a half, smooth in 2 places, and the 2 places were about a shoulder's width apart. I stood on the catwalk and ran my hand along it in the sun with about 6 people around me doing an after-action on something else entirely, and nobody looked over. And I remember thinking that I could put my 2 hands in the 2 low spots, and I did not want to, and then I did, and they fit. Motorpool wrote it up as a load shift. That's the box you tick when steel is out of shape and nobody knows why. They welded a doubler plate over both spots, and the truck went back on the line the next week, and as far as I know, that doubler is still on it. The paperwork took 4 days. I hated every minute of it, and I have never in my life been so grateful for a form. Because a form is a thing where you write down what happened in the boxes provided, and then it's finished, and somebody files it. There was no box for the frost. I checked. I read that whole form looking for a box. I got out in 2021. I run a parts counter now in Oregon, and I'm happier than I was. I check my mirrors, top of frame, first. Not the road, not the lane, the top edge, both sides, and then the road. In a Corolla, in a parking lot, in the daytime, at 29 years old. My husband noticed it inside a month of dating me and asked about it once, and I said it was a truck thing, and he took that, because it is a truck thing. The wind was on my face and the bush was still. That's the part I'd take back if I could only have one. Everything else I can do something with. Maybe a gauge failed, and a rail was already bent, and my eyes did something to me in a quarter second of moving light. That's 4 coincidences, and I've made peace with 3 of them. But I felt the wind, and nothing out there was moving. The number had 5 digits in it, and the field is 4 digits, and it has been 4 digits since before I worked there. My name's Arvin Boyle, I'm 47, I live in Barstow, and for 11 years I've been paid to pretend for a living. I'm a role player out at the training center at Fort Irwin. One of the civilians who lives in the fake town so that the units rotating through have somebody to talk to who isn't wearing their uniform. Shopkeeper, town elder, angry cousin, whatever the scenario needs that week. I was in the army before that, 8 years, and I'd rather do this. The town is shipping containers. That's the trick of it. Steel boxes stacked too high with plaster on the outside, and doorways cut in them, and streets between, and a market, and a building with a dome on it, and from 100 feet up on a camera feed it reads as a town. From the inside, at midnight in August, it reads as a very large collection of hot metal, ticking as it cools. We sleep in trailers at the back. 140 of us, that rotation, give or take, and I've known most of them for years. It's a good job. There's an ice cream truck that comes out to the box which sounds made up and isn't, and which charges what you would expect. I'll give you a sense of the work, because it explains the kind of man I am about all this. I have a makeup kit. Most of us do, the ones who've been there a while. Silicone, wax, a palette of about 9 colors, and you can put a wound on a soldier's arm that will make a 20-year-old medic's hands shake. I made a compound fracture once, out of wax and a piece of dowel that a lieutenant colonel looked at for a full 3 seconds before he remembered where he was. I'm proud of that. It's craft. It is also, and I want this on the record, a thing I know is fake, and I know it's fake because I built it. I had a town elder costume that rotation with a good wool cloak on it. Wool, in August, in the Mojave. You do it because it looks right on camera and you sweat about 4 pounds a day and nobody has ever thanked me for it. And there's a water buffalo. That's a water trailer, a big tank on wheels, parked at the corner of the market street, and filling a canteen off it at midnight is one of the small rituals of the job. The water comes out warm as a bath in August. You drink it anyway. That night I had the sleeping village shift. Here's what that is. When the rotating unit is out at a distance and the exercise wants the town to look occupied, somebody walks it. One person moving through the streets, turning a light on and off in a window, being a heat signature, so that when somebody 6 kilometers away looks at a feed, the town is alive. That's the whole job for 4 hours, and it pays the same as the days when I get to have a scene. So I was alone. Genuinely, structurally alone. The brigade was 6 clicks out and would not come in before dawn. The town was empty, and everyone I know in the world within 30 miles was asleep in a trailer at the back. I was wearing Miles gear, because you always are. Miles is the laser tag. That's the honest description. There's a harness of sensors you wear, and a halo of them on your helmet. And when somebody's weapon puts a laser on you, the harness makes a noise. A short chirp is a near miss. A long, steady tone is a kill. And you lie down, and you're out, and later somebody comes and resets you. And every event prints a number. A little event number, 4 digits, out of a fixed block, and range control reads them off when they reconstruct who shot who. I have read 1,000 of those numbers off to people over the radio. It is one of the more boring things I know how to do. I'm telling you all this because I want you to understand my qualifications. I've been paid to pretend for 11 years. I know exactly what pretending looks like from the inside, including when other people are doing it to me, which happens, because we prank each other constantly. And I know what that gear does. Around 10 past midnight, my harness gave me a near-miss chirp. 1 chirp. Nobody within 6 kilometers. I stood there in the market street and I said something out loud, some joke, to nobody, because that's what you do. I figured a sensor had cooked. It was 90-some degrees and those harnesses live in a bin. About 2 minutes later, I got a kill tone. Long, steady, unambiguous. And the harness has directionality. It tells you roughly where the hit came from, and it told me the hit came from my left, from about 2 meters away, and 2 meters to my left was the wall of a container. Solid steel with plaster on it. There is nothing to shoot through and nothing to shoot from. I turned my light on the wall like an idiot. There was a wall, and then the trailers started. You could hear them from the market street, faint, 400 feet back. A harness chirping in a trailer. Then the next trailer, then the next. Down the row, in order, one after another, evenly spaced in time. And I stood there and listened to it go all the way down the line and off the end. And the pace of it was the pace of a person walking. Not fast, not slow. Walking past a row of parked trailers and touching each one. I counted them going by. I don't know why I counted. 11 trailers on that row, and I got 11. And the gap between each one was about the same. And I remember thinking, the way you think a thing before you understand you've thought it, that whatever was doing it wasn't in a hurry and wasn't looking for anything. It was just going along the row, the way you'd run a stick along a fence. 140 people were in those trailers. Nobody woke up. Nobody came out. In 11 years out there, I have never once known a night when 140 people all sleep through anything. Because half of them are night owls, and 2 of them are insomniacs, and somebody is always up smoking. Not one door opened. In the morning, I asked around, carefully, sideways, and got nothing. And 2 of them asked me why I looked like that. I should say something about the light out there, because it's part of why I trust what I saw, and part of why I hate it. Sodium lamps put out one color. Orange, and everything else in the world goes to gray under it. You can't tell a red door from a brown one. Faces go the color of a paper bag. It's the ugliest light there is, and it has one virtue, which is that it is bright and it is hard-edged and it does not flatter anything. In sodium light, there is no soft focus. Whatever's there is there, in orange and gray, with an edge on it. Range control came up on the net about a minute later. Said they had a system event across the village. Said they'd reset everything remotely and I should go get a coffee. So I went and got a coffee. That's the part people don't expect. There was a whole stretch there, 4 minutes maybe, where it was an ordinary night with a gear glitch in it. I filled a cup from the urn in the support trailer, and I stood outside with it, and I looked at my phone. And there's exactly one spot in that town where you get a bar of signal, and I was standing in it. And my daughter's texts all came in at once the way they do. 3 of them. About a car she wanted. Then I looked up at the roofline over the market street. There was something lying along the edge of it. Long. Lying down flat on the roof with its head at the parapet and its chin resting on its forearms. The way a man watches a slow ball game from a porch railing. Pale, not white, more like the inside of a shell. And I could see it clearly because that street has 2 sodium poles on it, and sodium light is hard and mean, and it doesn't leave you much to wonder about. It was watching me have a coffee. I didn't run. I want to be honest that this is not courage. I have thought about it a great deal, and the truth is that it did not occur to me to move. I stood there with a cup in my hand and I looked at it, and it looked at me. And neither one of us did anything for a length of time that I have never been able to shorten in my own head. It felt like several minutes. It was probably less than 1. There's a thing about that street. Sodium light comes off 2 poles at a steep angle, and it throws your shadow onto the ground like somebody painted it. Mine was there. Hard edges, black, right where it should be. There was no shadow under that roofline. There was nowhere it could have been. I was looking at the ground before I was looking anywhere else, because that's where my eye went, and the street was empty. Then it wasn't there. I never saw it move. That's the thing I can't get past, and it's the thing that sounds the most like a lie. I did not blink. I did not look away. There was a shape on the roofline, and then the roofline was a roofline, and my coffee was still hot enough to be worth drinking, which is how I know it wasn't several minutes. The harness event was still on the readout. That's the part I can hand somebody. It was 5 digits. I have read those numbers off for 11 years, and they are 4. The manual says 4. Range control says 4. I took a photograph of the readout with my phone right there in the street. Badly, one-handed. And the photograph shows 5 digits. And I have moved that photograph onto every new phone I've had since, 3 phones now, and it's still 5 digits. Range control has a voice. Every one of them. It's a flat voice that has read 6,000 event numbers and has no opinion about any of them, and I have always found it soothing. And that night I found it soothing too. They called it a system event. That's a real category. Systems do have events. Half the time it's the heat. I brought it to range control the next morning, and a very decent young woman named Duval pulled up the field spec and showed me on the screen that the field is 4 characters wide, and looked at my photo and looked at the screen, and looked at my photo again, and then said she'd write it up. The maintenance log says, harness anomaly, no fault found, returned to service. That harness went back in the bin, and I have probably worn it since. I still take night shifts, the pay differential is real, and I like the quiet. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you I was traumatized, because I wasn't. I go out, I walk the town, I turn lights on and off, I come home at 4 and sleep till noon. I don't look at roof lines, not once in 11 years since. I walk with my eyes down the street the way you'd walk through a bad neighborhood, which out there is funny, because there's nobody in it. My wife says that's an answer all by itself. Maybe she's right, maybe a man who really thought it was a gear fault would look up. I've got a photograph with 5 digits in it and no explanation for the number. That's what I've got. Everything else I could talk myself out of, and some nights I do, and it works right up until I get to the number. The water was boiling and the thermometer said 61 degrees, and I stood there and watched it go down. Marcus Tandy. Sergeant, Army Reserve, food service out of Sacramento, and in November of 2019 I was 33 years old and running a field kitchen at Fort Hunter Liggett on a drill weekend that had turned into 9 days. I feed people. That's the job, and I like it. And I'm going to say something that sounds like a joke and isn't. It is the only military job where 500 people are actively glad to see you twice a day. Everybody else out there is somebody's problem. I'm the one with the eggs, 1,000 eggs that weekend. I want to give you a sense of it. 1,000 eggs is 9 cases plus change, and you crack them into a hotel pan in a rhythm, 2 at a time, and you can do about 6 a minute clean. And if you do the arithmetic on that, you'll understand why cooks get up at 2:30 in the morning. There's a whole apparatus to it that nobody sees. The insulated food containers, we call them hot boxes, get loaded and sealed and driven out to the units that can't come to you, and the sealing is a ritual with a gasket and a clamp and a temperature written on a strip of tape, and if the tape says the wrong number when it gets there, somebody's morning is ruined and it's mine. The burners run on fuel that smells like a runway. You get so used to that smell that when I fly commercial and they're fueling at the gate, I get hungry, which my wife thinks is the single worst fact about me. And the drive. Sacramento down to Hunter Liggett is a long one, and the last hour of it is 2-lane, and I've done it in the dark 80 times, and I always stop at the same place for coffee I don't need. 2:30, in the dark, alone. My crew of 3 came out at 3. So there's a half hour every morning where I'm the only person awake in a 500-person camp, and I have been that person 100 and some times in my life, and I'm on good terms with it. 3 a.m., and I have an understanding. I say that because I know what 3 a.m. does to people. It makes things out of the corners. Everybody who works nights knows this. And nobody who doesn't will believe you when you say you can tell the difference. I can tell the difference. Hunter Liggett is oak country. Big spreading valley oaks, dry gold hills, wild pigs that come through the trash line at night and knock over anything they can knock over. That's the normal 3 a.m. event out there, a pig in the trash, and the first time you jump and after that you just yell at it. And in November you get tule fog. If you've never been in it, tule fog isn't weather so much as a condition of the world. It comes up off the valley floor and lies there, and it is so thick that a headlamp gives you a white wall about a foot from your face. Not a beam, a wall. You can almost lean on it. You navigate by the ground, and by the smell of your own burners, and by memory. The kitchen is a trailer under a canvas fly with 3 burner units in it going full, which is a wall of noise. Inside there, my crew couldn't have heard a car alarm. I was outside, at the sanitation line, 10 feet from the trailer. And in that fog, I could not see the trailer. The sanitation line is 3 cans of water on immersion burners. You wash, you rinse, you sanitize, and the sanitizing can has to hold at 170 degrees, or the whole thing is theater. There's a thermometer clipped to the rim. I check it every 20 minutes. The inspection is real. A health inspection in the field is a real thing that a real person does with a real clipboard. And also, honestly, checking it every 20 minutes is a thing to do at 3 in the morning, and you want things to do. At about 3:20, I checked it, and it read 170, which is what it always reads. At about 24 past, I checked it again for no reason, and it read 112. That's not a small thing. That's a can with a burner under it wide open and water moving in it, and I put my hand near the surface and it was hot, the way boiling water is hot, and the thermometer said 112. I stood there and I watched the needle. Over about the next 4 minutes it went from 112 to 61 in a burning can, with steam coming off the top of it into a fog that swallowed the steam about 6 inches up. And then the fog stopped. I don't know how else to put that. It had been moving east all night, steady, the way tule fog does, drifting through the oaks like smoke off a chimney and no wind. You don't notice it moving, until it doesn't. It stopped, just held. And the piece of it I was looking at held its shape long enough that I could see it had a shape, which fog doesn't, and then kept holding. That's when I saw the hole in it. Beyond the third can, at the edge of what my lights would do, there was a place where the fog went around something instead of through it. That's the only honest way to describe what I saw, so that's what I'm going to say. Not a figure. A gap in the white, upright. And the fog was pouring around the sides of it and closing behind it, and the top of the gap was level with the low branch of the oak I'd walked under every day that week without ducking. I'm 6'1". I know what that branch is. And there was no breath. That's the thing that turned it for me. It was 38 degrees. My crew's breath was coming out through the trailer vents in white plumes you could see from 20 feet. Mine was going up in front of my face and joining the fog. 6 minutes, more or less, and there was nothing coming off that shape at all. The air in front of it was empty. In fog like that, you can see the wake behind a moth. I've seen it. That's not a figure of speech. 2 soldiers came out for early coffee about 4 minutes later. The coffee urn is an institution. It goes on first before anything, because there is always somebody up, and the somebodies who come first are always the same, 2 or 3 people, and you learn who they are. That morning, it was a specialist named Yarnell, and somebody with him I didn't know, and they came down the path with a red light, and they walked directly through that spot, both of them, one after the other, close enough to touch it, and they noticed nothing. I watched them do it. I did not say a word. What would I have said? I've asked myself that since, and I still don't have the sentence. I'll tell you what I did instead, because it's the true thing and it isn't flattering. I turned my back on it and I went and cracked eggs. About 60 of them, I'd guess, in a row, 2 at a time, in the rhythm, with the noise of the burners in my ears and my hands doing a thing they've done 10,000 times. That is what a person does. You go back to the job because the job is the handrail. I don't know how long it stayed. I know it was there when I turned around, and it wasn't when I turned around again, and that in between there was a stretch of about 10 minutes where I was standing at a hotel pan with my back to an open draw at 3:30 in the morning, cracking eggs. Then the thermometer came back up. 140, 160, 170, and it sat there like a good thermometer, and the fog moved again, east, at its old pace, exactly like nothing. So I did what a reasonable man does. I decided I had a bad thermometer, which happens, and I went and got the spare out of the box and clipped it on. The new one read 170. I want you to sit with that for a second the way I did. For about a minute, that was a relief. 2 thermometers agreeing is a good outcome. It took me longer than it should have to work out that if the new one was right, then the old one had also been right, because they'd both been in the same water, and the water at 324 had been 61 degrees while it was boiling. I carried the old thermometer over to the trash line to pitch it, and my route took me across that spot. The ground there was dry. Everything in that draw had been soaking for 6 hours. 6 hours of fog on hardpack and oak leaf and dead grass, and every step I'd taken all morning had come up damp. And there was an oval of dry ground, about the size of a door laid flat, and it was the only dry thing I saw in a mile in any direction that morning, or any morning that week. I crouched and put my hand flat on it. It was warm. Not sun warm. The sun was 2 hours off and hadn't touched anything for 3 days anyway. It was the temperature of a plate coming out of a warmer. That specific warmth. I know that warmth better than most people alive know it, and while my hand was still down, the fog closed over it. I watched the edges of the dry come in. It took about 4 minutes for that oval to disappear, which I know because I stayed there and timed it on my watch, crouched in the dirt like a fool, because I had figured out what 4 minutes meant. If it took the fog 4 minutes to cover the ground after it left, then it had been standing there long enough to dry it out. Longer than 4 minutes. A lot longer, probably. Standing there, that distance from me, while I read a thermometer and thought about eggs. I took a picture. It's a picture of white fog with a gray patch in it. I have shown it to 2 people in 6 years, and I stopped after the second one. I still cook for the unit, 19 years in now. My daughter's drawing is still taped inside the trailer door, the same one, a horse with too many legs, and it's gone soft at the corners. I check the thermometer every 20 minutes. That has not changed, and it won't. What's changed is that I stand with my back against the trailer to do it. Both burners on my left, the sanitation line in front of me, the trailer wall behind. It took my crew about a year to notice, and they've never asked, and I appreciate that more than I've told them. Maybe it was a bad batch of thermometers and a warm spot in the ground from something buried, a pipe, a rock, who knows what's under that draw. That's a real explanation, and I've used it. Then I think about the fog going around it. Fog doesn't do that for a pipe. Every bead was pushed over, all 13, and I had walked 400 meters. My name's Hollis Byrne. In September of 2014, I was 25 and an officer candidate at Camp Roberts, which is in the dry hills between Paso Robles and King City, and I was out on a nightland navigation course from 8:30 in the evening until midnight midnight. I'd done 4 years enlisted before I went the officer route. I want that on the table early, because there's a joke in the Army that lieutenants can't read a map. And it's a good joke, and it's mostly true, and I've told it myself about 200 times. Prior enlisted is different. Prior enlisted means somebody's platoon sergeant already made you walk it until you could do it. So, I have been lost in the dark professionally. I know what that is. It has a particular flavor, and it is mostly embarrassment. This wasn't lost. Nightland Nav is one of the few things the Army makes you do alone, on purpose. Everything else is buddy pairs because 2 people don't die as easy as one, but the whole point of a land nav test is to prove the individual can do it without anybody's help, so they scatter you. That night, there were about 15 of us spread across 10 square kilometers of oak and grass. You get a map, a protractor, a pencil, and a set of grid coordinates. You plot your points, you shoot an azimuth with your compass, and then you walk it, counting your paces. At each point there's an engineering stake in the ground with a letter code punched into a plate, and you write the letter down, and that's your proof you were there. There's a smell to a laminated map that I associate with being 22 and happy. Plastic and pencil lead and whatever they use on the grease pencils. I could pick it out of a lineup right now. My first sergeant, back when I was enlisted, used to say the same line every single time anybody stepped off on a course. Trust the compass, not the ground. He'd been saying it for so long it had stopped being advice and become a kind of blessing. I still hear it in his voice, 10 years after I stopped working for him, every time I put a compass in my hand. 2 pieces of equipment matter to this story. The first is my headlamp. It was one of those cheap ones with the cycle in it. You press the button and it's white. Press again, flashing white. Again, red. Again, flashing red. Again, off. And then white again, which means getting from red to white takes 3 deliberate presses and about 4 seconds. And I want you to hold on to that number. The second is my pace count. I ran mine on beads, a cord with 9 beads on the bottom section and 4 on the top. Every 100 meters you push a bottom bead. When you push 9, you push a top bead and reset the bottom, and now you've walked a kilometer. It's an old system and it's better than counting in your head because your head lies to you and a bead doesn't. 13 beads total, 1,300 meters if you push them all. The night itself was beautiful, and I don't want to skip that. Dry grass in September, that sounds like paper when you walk through it. Oak stands sitting on the hills in black clumps. A full moon behind clouds that were moving fast, so the light came and went like somebody working a light switch. You'd get 30 seconds of enough moonlight to read a map by, then a minute of nothing. I got my points without any trouble. 4 of them in a rough line, and I was done by about 10. Which was a problem, because if you come back early, they give you another set of points, and I did not want another set of points. So I did what every prior enlisted candidate in the history of the Army has done. I sat down on a hillside to burn an hour. I had a bag of Skittles that had been in my ruck since Fort Benning, and had fused into a single object. I ate them, one at a time to make it last, off the block, like a man with a bar of chocolate in a novel about the war. I watched the course. Down below me, a couple of people went by with a white light out, reading their map, which you are not supposed to do, and I called down and startled the daylights out of both of them and gave them a hard time about it. That was around 10:15. They went on and I sat there. There were owls going the whole time. 3 of them, in 3 directions. In that call and answer they do. At some point in there they stopped. Not one after another, together. I noticed because it changed the shape of the quiet, and it took me a minute to work out what was missing. And then I sat there for another minute waiting for them to start. And they didn't. I decided it was time to walk back. I came down off the hillside and pushed through some brush and came out into a clearing where the prairie runs up against the timber. There are some dead trees in that clearing, standing gray snags. One of them is split, broken off about halfway up, maybe 15 feet, with a jagged top. There was a head and shoulders on top of it, backlit, against the clouds, which had that glow in them from the moon behind. A perfectly clear silhouette. Head, neck, the line of 2 shoulders. And I thought, somebody climbed a stump to get a better look at the terrain, which is a thing an idiot would do. And now they're stuck, which is what happens to idiots. So I walked toward it and I called up, something like, "Hey, you need a hand," and it turned toward me. I want to describe that carefully because it is the whole story. The movement was small, a shift of the shoulders and the head coming around, and it was completely silent. 15 feet up, a dead snag. If a person turns on a dead tree, that tree talks about it. Bark comes off. Something creaks. There was nothing. I stopped where I was. I said something else, I think. I don't remember what. There's a thing where you can feel that a situation is wrong before you have any facts to support it, and I had that standing in the open in dry grass, and at the same time I was not going to be the candidate who gets spooked by a battle buddy on a stump. So I asked again if they needed a hand. And the moon came back. I got about 2 seconds. That's the best look anyone in this story gets, and it's 2 seconds. It was long. That's the first word my brain gave me. Stretched out and bald, and the color of the underside of a mushroom. Its arms were around the trunk, both of them, wrapped, with the hands meeting on the far side, and the arms were long enough that it was easy for them to meet. It was thin in a way I associated with an animal that hasn't eaten, and at the same time it had gotten 15 feet up a smooth dead snag with no branches on it. So whatever it wasn't weak. The face was pinched. I've said that word to about 4 people and none of them have understood it, so let me try again. The features were small and gathered into the middle of a head that was too big for them. I could not find the eyes. There was nowhere on that face that I could look and say, "There." And I knew anyway, completely, without any doubt at all, that it had been looking at me the whole time I'd been in that clearing, and probably since I came down the hill. I swore, loud. That's what I did. Then I got my light onto it, and going from red to white takes 3 presses and about 4 seconds, and in the flashing red part of that cycle I got about 4 frames of it coming down the trunk. Head first. On all fours with the arms bent out wide, the way a lizard comes down a wall. By the time I had white light, the clearing was empty and the snag was a snag. I want to give the 90 seconds after that their due, because they were good. For 90 seconds I had a coyote on a stump. Coyotes get up on things. I stood there and built the whole explanation, and I used those 90 seconds to get my breathing down, and it worked. Then I started for the road. Here's what I did not do. I did not run. I've heard people ask why, like it's the obvious thing. I was carrying about 40 pounds, in the dark, on a hillside full of squirrel holes and downed limbs, and running in that ground is how you break an ankle 2 kilometers from anybody. I've seen it happen twice. So I walked a slow, perpendicular line toward the hardball road that runs up the side of the training area. 8 minutes about. And the whole 8 minutes something kept my pace in the tree line. Off my left shoulder, 30 or 40 meters in, moving when I moved. Not closing. It never came a step nearer, not falling back either. It just held the distance exactly, and I could hear it because the brush in there is dense and dry, and there's no such thing as moving through it silently. I stopped to test it. It stopped. There was a beat first, about a half second, like something that had to notice and then decide, and then it stopped. I did that 4 times. 4 times it stopped. I got to the hardball and the road was open ground with a moon on it, and I stood there for a second, and then I did something entirely out of habit, because habit is what's left when the rest of you has gone somewhere. I checked my beads. Every bead on both cords was pushed all the way over. 1,300 meters. From my last point to that road, on the map, measured after, is 400 meters, and beads don't push themselves. That cord was in my left hand, or clipped to my shoulder strap the whole night, and pushing a bead is a deliberate thing you do with a thumb. I photographed the cord in my truck at 1 in the morning with the dome light on. I still have it. It's a bad picture of a piece of cord with 13 beads bunched at one end, and it proves nothing to anyone. And I took it because I knew even then that in a week I would start editing myself. The last 100 meters to the trucks goes over a cattle guard, the grate of pipes set into the road so cattle won't cross it. It makes a particular hollow banging under boots that carries about a half mile in that country. I crossed it deliberately loud. Now that's not something I'm proud of, and it's not something I'm ashamed of either. I wanted the noise around me. The 2 candidates I'd yelled at earlier had crossed that same clearing about 20 minutes ahead of me, with a white light out, which throws more light on a stand of dead snags than anything I had all night. I asked one of them the next day, sideways, whether he'd seen anything out there. He said no. He said it was the most boring 4 hours of his life and asked if I'd found all my points. At the trucks, a sergeant first class asked me why I was covered in dirt and out of breath, and I told him I'd gotten turned around, which was a lie, and he let me have it about officers and land nav, which I deserved and enjoyed. I never told anyone in that class, not one person. I'm a major now. I teach this, among other things. Every cycle I stand up in front of a room of candidates and I tell them the same 2 pieces of advice about Nightland Nav, and neither one is in the program of instruction. Walk, don't run, and count out loud. They think the second one is about accuracy. I let them think that. I've never told a class why, and I'm not going to because I like those kids and I want them to enjoy the woods. Maybe I misread the whole thing. It was 1 full moon, 2 seconds, and a set of beads I could have pushed myself without knowing it while my hands were doing something else. People do that. Hands do things. But then again, maybe not. And I do notice that in 11 years, I have never once gone back out on that course at night, and I have had 11 years of chances. Nobody moves a flag out there but me. That's not a rule I made up, that's the rule. And the reason for the rule is that moving a flag is how people die. Gene Halverson. I'm 58. I was a range control technician for 31 years, most of it out on the aerial gunnery range in the Chocolate Mountains in Imperial County, and I retired 2 years ago. I'll tell you the thing I'm proudest of, and then you'll know what kind of man you're dealing with. In 31 years, I never wrote the word unknown on a form. Not once. If something happened on my range, I found out what it was, and if I couldn't find out, I stayed until I could. And I have gone home at 4 a.m. over a thing that turned out to be a coyote and a tarp. I'm going to have to use that word now. I've had 4 years to find another one. The range is closed country. That's the whole nature of it. It's a live impact area with ordnance in the ground going back to the 1940s. And there are lanes you drive and you do not leave the lanes on foot, and if you're inside that fence, you are one of maybe 6 people on Earth authorized to be there that day. Most days it's just me in a white pickup and 100 square miles. You get to like it. I want to say that clearly because people assume it's a grim place. It isn't. There are ravens out there that learn a truck and follow it for the lunch bag, and I fed those birds for 3 decades, and there was one with a bad foot that I knew for 11 years. Heat lightning works the horizon in the summer with no sound at all, which is a thing worth driving out to see. And on a night wind, you'll get the Salton Sea from 40 miles off, which smells exactly like what it is, and even that I ended up fond of. The flags are my job. Anything that gets dropped or fired and doesn't function is a dud, and a dud is the whole problem out there. So, on a sweep, when I find one, I plant a numbered pink flag next to it and I log the grid, and then a team comes later and disposes of it. The flags are on wire stakes about 30 inches long. They go in with a boot. Nobody touches them. Nobody. Because if a flag ends up somewhere a dud isn't, then somebody eventually walks where a flag isn't. And that is the whole mechanism by which people get killed on a range. I gave the safety brief on that range something like 1,000 times, to pilots and to visiting officers and to a documentary crew once, and I could still give it to you word for word, standing here. It starts. You are entering an active impact area, and everything on the ground is presumed live. Then the lanes, then the flags, then the sentence about not picking anything up, which people laugh at, and I would wait for the laugh and then say it again. I had a steel thermos in that truck that was older than most of the pilots flying on my range, my father's. It kept coffee hot for 9 hours and it kept it tasting like a thermos, which is its own thing and which I've come to prefer. I say all this so you know what you're getting. I am the most boring man who ever held a job, and that was on purpose, because the range does not reward interesting people. The night I'm telling you about was in May, and I was doing a dusk sweep of the eastern lanes, and I'd been on the range since about 2 in the afternoon. At 6, I'd planted flag 41 next to a piece of ordnance in a flat about a half mile off the lane. I logged the grid. I remember it because 41 is a number I'd used a lot that month, and I'd made a joke to myself about it. One of those jokes you make when you're alone, and it doesn't have to be good. I came back through at about 9 on my way to the gate. Flag 41 was 30 meters west of where I put it. Standing up. Straight up, not leaning, out in the open flat, 30 meters west and slightly north of the log grid, and I sat in the truck with the door open and my hand on the wheel and looked at it for a good while. First thought is, somebody's here. That's the correct first thought. Somebody hiked in, you get that occasionally, people cutting through country they shouldn't, and it is a serious matter and it is also an explanation, and I would have been happy with it. So I went and looked at the base of it. There was no hole. I want to explain what caliche is because this is the part that requires it. The ground out there is caliche, a hardpan, calcium carbonate, essentially a natural concrete. When you drive a stake into it, you get a hole. You get spall around the hole, a little crater of broken white, and dust, and the stake sits in a socket you can see. That's the only way a stake goes into caliche. There isn't another way. Flag 41 was standing in ground that was closed around it. No spall, no dust ring, no socket. The caliche came right up, flush against the wire like the stake had grown there. I put 2 fingers on the stake and worked it, and it was tight the way a fence post is tight after a winter. And the original hole, 30 meters east, was exactly where I left it. Open, with the spall still around it. I went back to the truck. I did not run, and I did not hurry, and that's not bravery, it's 31 years of not running on a live range. I drove the lane out. About 4 minutes along, the lane drops into a wash. The road cuts down through a bank and across a sand bottom and up the other side, and my headlights came around and down into it. There was something standing in the wash. It was tall. It was standing square onto the truck, which is the first thing that was wrong, because everything alive out there turns sideways or leaves, and it did not shield its eyes. I've had my lights on burros, coyotes, bighorn, and 2 lost hunters, and every single one of them either bolts or throws a hand up because those are pickup high beams at 50 feet. It stood there and took it. I got maybe 5 seconds, and I'm going to give you what I actually have, which is less than you want. Pale. Long. The legs were wrong in a way I could not make into an animal and could not make into a man. The head was smooth, and the face didn't have anything on it that I could see, no eyes to speak of, and I've thought 1,000 times about whether that means it had none, or just that it had none I could find at 50 feet in a headlight. I'll say the other thing, and then I'll move on, because it's the part I've never much wanted to look at. Going past it, I had the window down. You drive with the window down out there in May because the air conditioning in a government pickup is a rumor. And I did not roll it up. There wasn't time, and there wasn't a thought. And nothing came in and nothing happened, and I've never known whether that means anything at all. I did not stop. That's the honest report. I kept my speed and I went by it, and I did not look in the mirror, which is a decision I made deliberately and have never regretted. Here's the thing I noticed a half-mile later, and it's the piece that has kept me up. Out there, the dust hangs. You can see your own dust in the mirror, lit orange by the tail lights for 100 meters behind you on a still night, and it settles slow because there's nothing in the air to knock it down. The air behind that thing was clean. It had been standing in the middle of a sand wash, and there was nothing hanging around it. Nothing kicked up, nothing drifting. It had gotten to the middle of a wash without disturbing a wash. Also, and I only put this together at the gate, on the bench on the far side there were 2 burros standing in the open. Burros out there will move off from a truck at a half-mile. I have watched them do it my whole career. Those 2 stood and chewed and watched me go by like I was weather happening somewhere else. At the gate, I did what I always do. Chain, lock, log entry, time in and time out, and I sat in the cab under the dome light and wrote it up. And I looked over and there was a handprint on the inside of the passenger window. I had been alone in that truck for 7 hours. It was long-fingered. That's the description, and I'll stand behind it. The palm was set high on the glass, higher than a person sitting in that seat could press with a flat hand, and the fingers ran up from it. And there were 4 of them, and a thumb, and the 4 were not the lengths a person's are. There was no smear to it. It wasn't a swipe. It was a hand set flat on glass and lifted straight off. I put the back of my hand toward it, the way you check a stove. I could feel the cold at 6 inches. That cab had been in 104 degrees all afternoon, and it was still 90 inside at 9 at night. And there was cold coming off that patch of glass hard enough that I could feel it before I touched it. And when I did touch it, it was like the door of a freezer. And it stayed that way for as long as I could stand to keep my hand there, which was not long, and not because it hurt. I sat there with the logbook open on my knee and the pen in my hand for what my own time entry says was 19 minutes. And I did not write anything in those 19 minutes. And the log is the only reason I know how long it was. That's the piece of paperwork I have from that night. 19 minutes of nothing between two times. I took a photograph with the flash. The window in the photograph is clean. That's the part that bothers me if you want to know which part. Not the wash, the photograph. I know what I saw with my own eyes and I know what the flash saw, and those are two different windows. I drove home. I did not write it up, and I want to be honest that this was the one time in 31 years I put something in the log as a routine sweep when it wasn't. I wrote flag 41 relocated, cause undetermined, grid corrected. Which is true. Every word of it is true. There's a raven that came around the gate in those years, a big one, and she was always there at close-up waiting for whatever was left in the bag. She wasn't there that night. She was there the next night and every night after for 2 more years. They sent a team for the ordnance the next week and it was right where it always was, and the flag was 30 meters off. And the young man who called me about it asked if I'd moved it. And I said no, and he said, huh. And that was the whole conversation. I retired at 60. My wife and I have a place east of the range on a dirt road the county grades twice a year. Every time they grade it, I go out and plant a flag at the head of my driveway. I've got a coffee can of them in the garage. She thinks it's so the grader doesn't take out the culvert, and it is, partly. But that isn't why I keep doing it in the winter when nobody's grading anything. The arms came down at 11 minutes past 2 for a train that did not exist, and they stayed down for 11 minutes, and I have never liked that the two numbers match. I'm Bertie LaChance, Bernadette, but nobody's called me that since my grandmother died. In February of 2021, I was 31. And I was security forces on the coastal side of Vandenberg, working the north end, which is the loneliest post on that base and which I asked for. Let me get the 2 questions out of the way, because I've had them from a shift supervisor, a chaplain, and my own sister. Was I drinking? No. Not that night, not any night I've ever been on a post. Was I asleep? Also, no. And I'll tell you exactly how I know. Because I did a thing that night that requires being awake, which is that I counted 86 cars on a freight train and I can still tell you it was 86. The north end of that base is about as far from a human being as you can get in Santa Barbara County. Coastal sage, hills going down to the water, a 2-lane road, and a working freight line that runs right through the property, because it does. That's a real railroad with real trains on it. And it has been there longer than the base has. My post was the far northern crossing. 22 minutes drive from another person, and I timed that once out of curiosity, which tells you something about the job. And the fog. February on that coast, the fog comes in off the water, and it is not the fog people from other places think of. It'll take a truck at 30 feet. It has a smell. The Pacific at 2 in the morning does not smell like the Pacific at noon. It's colder and more mineral, and there's kelp in it. And it deadens everything. Sound goes about half as far as it should. I liked it out there, I want that understood. I had a heater in the shack that only worked on high, so it was either the surface of the sun or nothing. There are sea lions you can hear from that crossing on a still night, and they sound exactly like an argument in a basement 2 houses down. My partner had a dog she brought most nights, and the dog was at the vet that week, which is the one thing about that night I'd change if I could change one thing. There are launches out of there, and everybody asks about that, so I'll say it. The ones you remember are the scrubs. A launch is a launch, it's beautiful, everybody's phone comes out. A scrub is 400 people quietly disappointed at once, and there's a civic sadness to it that I found kind of touching. There was a scrub that week. I don't think it has anything to do with anything, and I mention it because people ask what else was going on. Ticks are the real enemy out there. Coastal sage is full of them, and there's a whole ritual at the end of a shift. Boots off outside, cuffs, the back of the knees, and everybody on that shift did it, and nobody talked about doing it. Here's the thing I did to pass the time, and it's the whole spine of this. The 240 freight comes through every night. It's a real train on a real schedule, and it's reliably within a few minutes. The crossing signal drops the arms about 90 seconds ahead of it. You hear the relay click, then the bell starts, then the arms come down, and then, a minute and a half later, there's the train. And I counted cars. Every night for 2 years, you get good at it. There's a rhythm to it, and you count in fours without deciding to, and my count was almost always between 80 and 90, and I could hit it to within 3. That night, the arms came down at 11 past 2, which is 29 minutes early, and which came with no relay click that I heard, and no 90-second warning that I recognized. I stood up out of the truck. Because a crossing coming down off schedule means either a maintenance of way vehicle is coming or the circuit's faulted, and either way I'm making a phone call. The bell was going. In that fog, the bell sounded like it was under a blanket in another room, which is the only way I know how to say it. The sound was there, and it was the right sound, and it was arriving from farther away than it should have been. The arms stayed down. 1 minute, 3, 5. No train. I made the call at about 7 minutes in. The dispatcher was an entirely pleasant man who had no signal fault logged, no train scheduled inside that window, no maintenance crew anywhere on that district, and absolutely no interest in the conversation. He said fog gets into the circuit sometimes. He said if it clears itself, don't worry about it. He wished me a good one and hung up, and I stood there with my phone in my hand feeling foolish, which is a feeling I would give a lot to have back. While the arms were down, something crossed the rails. I need to tell you carefully what I actually saw, because it is less than you want, and it is the only honest inventory I have. The signal flashes red. In fog that thick, the flash doesn't go anywhere. It lights up the fog itself, so you get a red glow that pulses, a wall of red that comes and goes, and in that glow, the fog is uniform. It's a solid field of it. Twice, that field had something in it. Tall. A vertical interruption in the glow, moving across the tracks, not fast, at a walk, and the red came around the sides of it and did not come through it. I saw it once at about the 9th minute going right to left, and I saw it once about 8 minutes after that, going left to right. Once going, once coming back. That's it. That's all I have. I never saw an edge or an outline or a limb or a face, and I'm not going to invent one for you. But the ballast didn't crunch. That's crushed rock between and around the rails, and it is the loudest walking surface God ever made. I have heard a raccoon on that ballast from 50 yards on a quiet night, and known it was a raccoon by the size of the sound. There was no sound, not a single stone turning over, and it was a still night. The fog was sitting, not blowing, and the bell was carrying fine, so sound was working. I did not get out of the truck for those 11 minutes, and I want to be straight about that. I had my headlights on, and they gave me a wall of white about 20 feet out, which is what headlights do in fog. They don't show you anything, they show you the fog, and the more light you put into it, the more solid the wall gets. Turning them off would have been the smart thing. I know that. I left them on and looked at a white wall and listened to a bell. At 22 past 2, the arms went up. The bell stopped. The relay clicked, and I heard the relay that time. At 2:41, the real freight came through, on time. Horn at the right place, too long, a short, a long, which is what they do at a crossing and which I could pick out of 100 noises. and I counted it. 86 cars. I want to give that its due because it was a genuinely happy 2 minutes. I stood in the fog and counted a train and felt like an idiot in the best possible way. I'd had a circuit fault and a trick of the light, and I called a man about it at 2 a.m. like a rookie. I even said something out loud to the dog that wasn't there. That's a thing you do on a post when you've worked with somebody's dog for a year and a half. I said something like, "See?" And there was nobody in the truck, and it was funny at the time, and it stayed funny for about 6 more minutes. Then the train was gone, and I took my flashlight and walked out to the crossing, because I'm thorough, and because I wanted to hand myself the last piece of the explanation. In the ballast between the rails there was a dry oval, about the size of a door laid down, and everything else out there was soaked. 6 hours of that fog on crushed rock, the whole crossing dark with wet, my own boots leaving prints in the damp dust on the asphalt. And there was this oval of pale dry rock with 2 deeper impressions at one end of it, pressed down into the ballast maybe an inch. The fog was not settling on it. I stood there for 2 or 3 minutes and watched it not settle. Everything around it was going darker, and that stayed the color it was. It took me another 10 minutes to see the other thing, and I only saw it because I was walking back and my light happened to be up. Every drop of fog on the crossing arm on that side had been wiped off. In a band. A clean stripe across the top of the arm about a hand wide, with beaded water on both sides of it and none in it. I'm 5'9". I put my hand up with the light in it and I could not reach the bottom of that band. Not close. I stood at that arm for a while with my hand up and my light on it, and then I did the thing you do, which is I got up on the bumper of the truck to see if the band lined up with anything. A mirror height, a piece of equipment, a branch. There's nothing overhanging that crossing. It's open on both sides for 60 yards. I checked, and then I checked again at the end of shift in daylight, and it's open. I filed the incident report. I'm required to, and I did, and I wrote it flat. No adjectives, times, and observations the way you're supposed to. It came back marked no further action. I kept a copy, which is technically not something I'm supposed to have, and it lives in a folder in my apartment with my lease and my truck title. I still work nights. I'm at a different post now, inland, and I'm fine. And this is not a story about somebody getting wrecked by something. The one thing that changed is that I count out loud. Cars, minutes, fence posts, whatever's going by. Out loud, at a normal speaking volume, alone in a truck at 3 a.m, and if somebody comes up on the radio mid-count, I finish the number first. I worked out why eventually, and it isn't complicated. It was never the dark out there that got to me. The dark is fine. It's the quiet and the specific quality of quiet where something is happening in it and not making any noise. So I make some. That's the whole adjustment. 11 years on nights, and that's the only thing I've had to change. Maybe a relay stuck and fog does things to circuits, and a truck went through that, crossing with a wide mirror on it before my shift, when the ballast was drier. That's 4 things, and every one of them is possible. And on a good night, I'll take all 4. But then again, I could not reach that stripe with my arm up. The card is still pink. That's the only piece of it I can put in your hand, and it's been in a drawer for 41 years, and it's still pink. My name is Walt Doris. I'm 62 now. In the summer of 1983, I was 21 years old, and I worked as an ammunition handler at the Army Depot outside Hurlong, up in the northeast corner of California, which is high desert. Sagebrush, alkali flats, and the Sierra sitting off to the west like a long blue wall. I'm going to tell you this the way an old man tells a thing, which means slowly, and it means I'll say when I don't know something. I've had 40 years to talk myself out of this. I did try, I never managed it, and at some point I stopped trying, and that was a better arrangement all around. The depot is igloos, that's what everybody calls them. Concrete magazines with earth mounted over the top and a steel door at one end, and there are hundreds of them out on that flat in numbered rows, going away from you until they're just shapes. They keep ammunition in them. In '83, the place was winding down and half those rows were empty, and it was the quietest job I ever had, and I liked it more than anything I did after. I rode a bicycle. Government gray, 1 speed, a wire basket on the front for the logbook. The far rows are 2 miles from the office, and walking them takes your whole afternoon, so somebody sometime had gotten a couple of bicycles and nobody had ever said anything about it, and that's how things were then. I rode those rows for 2 years. My hands smelled like the handlebars. Alkali dust does something to a chain, by the way. It's not sand, and it's not mud. It's a fine white powder that gets into everything and dries out grease, and I oiled that chain every Friday of my life. The job on my afternoons was the seal check. Every igloo has a humidity card inside, a little cardboard card with a dot on it, and the dot is blue when things are dry. And if the seal fails and moisture gets in, the dot turns pink. So you open the door, you look at the card, you look at the gasket, and you write a line in the log, 112 lines. It's a nothing job. Nobody has ever found anything wrong with a seal in the history of that depot as far as I know. After 4 in the afternoon, past about row 40, I was the only person out there. Every day, nobody minded and nobody checked on me, and I want to tell you plainly that it was the happiest I have ever been at work. That evening, I was way out in the 60s. And the sun was off the flat and the Sierra had gone that color they go from the east side, which is a pink you don't see photographed, because nobody's ever out there to photograph it. 614. That was the one. I opened it and the card was full pink. All the way, not a corner, not going. Pink like it had been sitting in a bathroom. And the seal was perfect. I got down and went all the way around that gasket with my fingers, and it was tight and clean, and I opened and shut the door twice to feel its seat. We'd had 5% humidity for 3 weeks. That's the number they read out at the morning meeting. 5%, 3 weeks, and a card gone pink inside a sealed magazine. Then I put my hand on the door to close it, and the steel was warm. The sun had been off that face 2 hours by then. Those doors are on the northeast side of the mound, and it wasn't the outside that was warm. I noticed because my knuckles were against the inside face while I was pulling it to, and the inside was warmer than the outside. I stood there a minute. I'm not going to make myself braver than I was. I was 21 and I thought, that's odd, and I wrote the line in the log, and I got on the bicycle. I was maybe 100 yards down the row when I saw it. 4 igloos along, standing in a doorway. That door is padlocked. All of them were, except the one you were working. I'd been down that row an hour before, and I would have gone right past that door. It was tall. The top of it was at the top of the arch, and I know those arches. You duck a little going in, most people do. It was pale, the color of the flesh of something, and it was thin. Standing straight, not leaning on the frame. Just standing in the mouth of the doorway with its arms down. I stopped the bicycle. And here's the thing that has stayed with me longer than anything else. Longer than what it looked like, which I'll admit has gotten softer in my memory the way a picture does. That gravel is loose. It's graded loose on purpose out there for drainage, and my tires on it made a racket you could hear a quarter mile off, which is why I heard the silence so well when I stopped. Because I had stopped, and there was nothing to cover anything. It stepped out onto the gravel. There was no sound at all. I looked around, the way you do, for a person to look at. There wasn't one, but the rabbits were up. That flat is full of jackrabbits, and they are the most nervous animal God made. They go off like a firework if you cough. They were sitting up in the sage all down that row. I could see a dozen of them without turning my head. And every single one of them was up on its haunches, and every single one was facing the same direction, and not one of them moved. I put my hand up. I don't know why. I wasn't waving. My hand just went up the way it does when you see somebody down a road and you're not sure yet if you know them. And it put its hand up. A beat late. Not quite the same speed, and it made the shape carefully, and that's the only word I've ever found. The way you copy a word in a language you don't speak. Watching your own hand while you do it to make sure you've got it right. I want to say something about how that felt, because I think people expect the wrong thing. It wasn't a fright. I've been frightened. I got hit by a car in '96, and I know what my body does when it's frightened, and it did none of that. What I felt was the way it was watching me, which was calm, completely calm, the way a man on a porch watches a train go by. There was no hurry anywhere in it, and it wasn't doing anything to me, and it wasn't going to. I rode on, not fast. I've thought about that too. I told the shift lead, a fellow named Mott, and he was decent about it, and he drove me back out with the truck lights on, and the row was empty, and 614 was locked with my own log line on it, and the padlock 4 down was locked and dusty. And we laughed about it on the drive back in, and I laughed too, and I meant it. I kept the card. That's the part that hasn't gone anywhere. I put it in a manila envelope because I was 21, and I thought maybe somebody would want it someday, and nobody ever did. Humidity cards cure back. They're made to. You put a pink one in a dry room, and inside a month the dot comes back to blue, and the card's good again. That's the whole design of the thing. Mine has been in the second drawer of a dresser in a dry house in Susanville since 1991. It's still pink. My granddaughter asked me once, when she was about 10, whether I was ever scared at work. I said no, honey, and that was true, and it's still true, and I've never told her this one, and I don't think I will. I ride a bicycle in the evenings now, a better one, a blue one, on a paved road east of town, with no igloos on it, and no gravel, and no sage to speak of. I go out around 7 when the light gets long, and I go a couple of miles, and I come back. I wave at people. I always have. What I notice, and this is the whole of what 40 years has left me with, is that people wave back right away, immediately. No pause in it at all. A car goes by and a hand comes up off the wheel before you finish lifting yours, and it costs them nothing. And they don't have to think about the shape. It pleases me more than it probably should. My wife has caught me smiling about it and asked, and I've said it was nothing, and it is nothing. Maybe I misread the whole thing. A tired kid, low light, a long row, an odd card. But then again, maybe not, and the light goes off the sage and the tires make their sound on the pavement, and that's the whole of it.